Everybody, my name is Devlin, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
This is an introduction to 12 steps. So 12 steps, this is everybody, this is 12 steps. I hope you've all met before. Whoops, I just lost it, but I'll find it now. So I'm gonna do a little repeat of something you guys probably hear every Thursday, right? AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to live happily and usefully wholly. I'm gonna share a little bit about my experience, and then we'll just go with that. The 12 steps are designed to produce two primary effects. Some people think it's one. I think it's two, and I'll tell you why. One is a spiritual awakening. The other is a psychic change. I think it's two because I've seen many people have a spiritual awakening and be able to stay sober for very long periods of time. But they go to the other AA called Assholes Anonymous. The only problem is it meets at the same time and place as regular meetings. The psychic change for me is where it's at, and that's where things change for me. So my experience, my sobriety date's August 1st, 1991. I got sober when I was 16. I lucked out. Well, I don't like using the word luck, but I got sober via rehab. The first meeting I went to outside of rehab, I introduced myself as being new, which is what I was told while I was in rehab. And I got a sponsor at my first meeting. I was very fortunate that he knew how to take the steps. And I asked him, what do we do? And he said, you need a big book, which I had my $40,000 big book from rehab. And he gave me assignments every week on what to read, highlight, underline, what I could relate to. And we met every Sunday after that meeting at my house. Unfortunately for me, a couple of weeks out of rehab, I was stopping by my buddies' houses to see what they were up to, and I ended up drinking again multiple times before and after meetings for a couple of months. I had my last drink. I didn't know it was going to be my last drink, but it was July 31st, 1991. I pulled an all-nighter. I had a head full of AA and a belly full of booze because I was going to meetings every day and meeting with my sponsor, even though I was periodically drinking, relapsing, whatever you want to call it, in the midst, and God entered my life. I did the first 3 steps, which I had attempted to do with my sponsor, but I did them with God this time. As outlined in the book, or in the chapter more about alcoholism, we fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. That's what happened that night. Concede means to admit and surrender or yield, and that's what I did. In the chapter We Agnostics, it talks about choosing either God is or God isn't. And I chose God was because God showed up. It was very obvious. And then I decided to turn my will and my life over to the care of that God. And I remember having in this experience with God, I told God I will do everything my sponsor asked me to do for the next 6 months. And if life doesn't get better, I'll go back to drinking. And God said, okay. And so my sponsor and I reviewed the steps, the first 3 steps over the next couple of weeks, and some additional discussions and writing and talking and all of that kind of stuff. And then he got me on my 4th step. So in the 4th step, in how it works in the big book, it says a couple of times, these are the things that block us from God. It describes those as a list of resentments, fears, and it describes it as sexual misconduct, but I like to think of it as relationship misconduct because I was 16 at that point and there's only like a couple of sexual things. The rest of it was all relationship related stuff. And there's a couple other things in there about, who else did we hurt and writing an ideal. And some people look at the 4 step as 3 things. I look at it as 3 or 5, depending on who I'm working with. And then So my sponsor gives me my 4-step instructions as outlined in the big book. I took out a sheet of paper. I wrote the little lines and stuff. I put a person's name on the top. I wrote what the cause was, what it affected, and what my part was. And then I thought about it for the next week and a half. And I didn't write. I spent a lot of time thinking about this 4-step, what I was going to write, who was going to be on there. I mean, it was forefront in my mind, but I did absolutely no writing. And I had a deadline. My sponsor gave me 2 weeks to get this thing done, which I think is pretty lenient. So I crammed and I started writing finally. Now I probably spent about 80 hours thinking about what I was going to write down. And when I actually sat and wrote things down, it maybe took 2 hours, right? And in little bits. For me, I did little bits. Every 20 minutes, I'd take a break. I'd do 10, take a break. I'd do 15, whatever. I'd come back the next day, write more. I got the bulk of that stuff written, probably with a day to spare, and then I went back and reviewed it, and was I thorough, right? Because that's what the 5th step talks about, being thorough. Have this meeting with my sponsor, read him all this stuff as outlined in the big book, bullet points, no big explanations. I didn't get to my part and then justify my part. I just read what I had written down. And my sponsors told me to do it that way, and if he had any clarifying questions, he would ask. And he maybe had 1 or 2 clarifying questions. And at the end of that, he said to me, what are those 3 take to the grave things that you didn't write down? And I thought to myself, how did he know that there were 3? And so I told him those 3 things. And then he told me some stuff from his 5th step. And I thought to myself, this man is sick. He needs to be locked up. But what I realized was that it was one alcoholic sharing and helping another, right? Sure. And for me, I felt a great weight lifted through that experience. And then we go on to 6 and 7. They're a paragraph apiece in the big book. Doesn't really explain much, leaves a lot of questions. I know now, I have a better understanding now of those steps. And the 6th step, our character defects, are identified in that inventory that we did, right? And that's why I need a sponsor to help me identify those things. It's into my part. I can't clearly identify all of my character defects. The grosser ones, yeah, we all get it, right? The anger and the fear and resentment and lying and all of that. But there's lots of other little tiny ones that are in there that I can't see because I'm in the forest and my sponsor's outside of the forest and he has clear vision. In that 3rd step, there's a prayer that if you're paying attention, it's an open-ended prayer. There's no amen at the end of it. And at the 7th step, there's an amen at the end of it. And that closes the prayer loop. The turning my will and my life over the care and direction of God in the 3rd step is doing the 4th step and the 5th step. And that's the 6th step and the 7th step. It's, to me, they're all essentially one giant step, right? My 8-step list is also in that 4-step. Those people that I owe amends to, and there's a part in the 4-step in the big book where it talks about who else have we hurt. It's talked about in the sexual or relationship portion of the inventory. But to me, that included a lot of people that I hurt, that I did not have resentment against, and they went on that 8-step list. Now, I wrote out that list, and it didn't take me very long because most of it was already written out on the 4-step. And my sponsor told me to do it in 2 different ways. He said, I want you to write 2 lists. I want you to write an easy list, the amends that would be easy, and the amends that would be hard. And I thought, awesome, I get to start with the easy ones. But it was a trick. He tricked me. And he said, and we sat and we reviewed, and I'm really grateful that he did this, and I do this with people that I sponsor. We reviewed every amend, writing some words down, and he gave me words to use because I didn't know what words to use. And I didn't want to make those amends and have to make amends for making the amends, right? Sure. So he told me you're going to make a hard amends and an easy amends and a hard amends and easy amends. So it started with the hard ones. In the 10th step in the big book and the 11th step in the big book, they kind of dovetail a little bit. 10th step is continue to take personal inventory, which is another form of the 4th step, maybe a shorter version. In the 12 and 12, it describes it as being, can be 4 different things. And we'll get into that maybe in a minute. The 11th step is about, through prayer and meditation, we continue to develop this relationship with God. I had a lot of questions when I was new about that. I didn't understand the difference between prayer and meditation. So I asked a lot of people that I trusted in AA that I went to meetings with. And there was a guy named Wayne. He was a Coast Guard captain. He used to fish dead bodies out of the bay from people that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. He had a cool mustache and he smoked a pipe, and I thought he was pretty awesome. So I remember asking him this question about prayer and meditation, because I don't know if you guys know this, but alcoholics can make things really complicated. And he told me prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening to God. And that made it really simple and easy for me. The funny thing is, years later, that comment has been affirmed to me through listening to a talk by a guy named Clarence. And I think this talk was probably in the 80s. And that's exactly what he said. And I thought, okay, it affirms that this is the correct path. The 12 steps, the 12th step is a whole bunch of things. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we take the steps, we should hopefully have a spiritual awakening. We carry this message to other alcoholics, and we practice these principles in all of our affairs. Now, the 12 steps are a group of principles, as I read in the beginning. I did not bring the list of what those principles are. We can talk about that maybe in another meeting or another time or part of the Q&A. And I have some other experts here that can help me along. But it assumes that we have had a spiritual awakening. In Bill's story, the spiritual awakening is described as a great white light experience. That happens to be very similar to the experience that I had my last night drinking. I think most people in AA are expecting that to happen to them. That is not what happens to most people. What happens to most people is a spiritual awakening of the educational brain, which is what happened to Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob expands on that in the book, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. It's lightly touched on in his story. He gets into it more in that book. So you can talk to Thomas after the meeting and buy a book because he's our literature guy. We carry the message to others. The first version of the 12th step, this is what it says. We carry the message to others, especially alcoholics. I like that version. I last week went to a day in Al-Anon, which was down in Dublin. And when they read their steps, that's what it says. And when they read their traditions, it says some things a little different than our traditions about including the alcoholics in their program. And I really appreciate that. And in early sobriety, I was not carrying much of a message, just that I was maybe physically sober and my life was changing, and that was visible to some people in my life, my family, maybe a couple of neighbors, maybe a few people at school. I carry a message of hope to people that are in need, inside and outside Alcoholics Anonymous. I've owned my own business for the last 20 years, and I don't tell my clients that I'm in AA, but there are sometimes I get in discussions with clients where it is very necessary to have a quiet conversation about what's going on in their life and where they might go seek some help and guidance, which might include church, it might include some other sort of services. I don't think I've had any conversations with clients about Al-Anon or anything like that, but I'm lucky to have some sober life experience, and I can share that with other people, not just alcoholics, but other people. Also in my family, my parents got divorced when I was 5. My dad got sober for a number of years. My mom was an active drinker, alcoholic. My sister started going to Al-Anon 3 years before I got sober, so it's like 1988-ish. She's been an active member of Al-Anon for the last 38 years. So in a way, she carried part of the message in the program of Al-Anon into our household. My original sobriety date, the day I went to rehab, was April 10th, 1991. It's not my sobriety date. But what happened at that rehab was me and my sister pointed the finger at our mom, and my mom quit drinking that day. And so my mom's sobriety date is April 10th, 1991, and she stayed sober until she passed away. I wasn't looking at the clock, so I don't know what the time is.
Yeah. 7 minutes.
9 and 7 minutes. I have gone through the steps multiple times with a sponsor. There have been times in my sobriety where either I have felt it necessary to do so, or they have deemed it necessary to do so. It's been my experience that a lot of times people go through the book with a sponsor, they read the steps, they take the steps, they go through that first 164, maybe a couple of stories in, and they set the book down and it gets dusty, and they go about their life, and the ego starts to creep back in, and at some point they might take their will back a little bit, or maybe a lot. It's been my experience, I've taken my will back a lot, a couple of times. Pride is reintroduced. The ego is super ginormous, and we don't even know it. And we start to destroy our lives again. And all of a sudden, our family, our friends, our employer, or our dog is mad at us, and we don't know why. And it's because we've kind of turned into a dick. Maybe even other things that are worse than just that. I have other friends with other afflictions, and some of those other afflictions crop up and cause problems. So like I said, I've felt it necessary to go through the steps many times. Also, when I am sponsoring people and I tell them to do things in the big book, read, write, highlight, underline, do a task, whatever it is, I do the same thing, right? I don't expect them to do it and me just sit on the sidelines and not do it. In the 10th step, it talks about these 4 things, a spot check inventory, a written inventory, a periodic, and an annual. I do all 4 of those things. I pay attention to my behavior throughout the day. And if I cross someone, usually my tummy doesn't feel too good about it. And that's my barometer that I need to go back and make things right. And sometimes that is relatively quickly to the incident. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days. I go to two to three retreats a year that are step working retreats. So I'm always doing step stuff at those retreats. And usually around my sobriety date, I go off, I have a special place I go to, and I go sit for a couple of hours and I review my sobriety. My whole sobriety, but usually just that year, and think, where am I at? What do I need to work on? Am I doing pretty good? Whatever it may be. And there's always areas of my life that need improvement. And from that, I'll usually talk to my sponsor about it, or maybe I even write some things down, and I'll work on those more focused things. My sponsor knows me very well, and my group of sponsee brothers know me very well. They can tell what's going on with me by looking at my face. There's been times where my sponsor's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine." And he's just pointing at me. And he's like, "No, it's not." Same with sponsee brothers. And we're all pretty tight and we know each other pretty well. So that's also a good barometer. Some tidbits I've learned over the years. My current sponsor now has told me that if I can't tell him or my kids what I'm doing, then I shouldn't be doing it. It's a very good barometer for my behavior. I also had a sponsor years ago that told me that the only time I am depressed is when I'm thinking about myself. I did a little 2-second review of my whole entire life and realized he was right. So when I start getting bummed out, I start thinking about that. I'm thinking about myself too much. My life is actually pretty good. lots of other people have said good things. Another guy told me that I shouldn't be judging my insides by other people's outsides. I should only be judging my insides by my own insides. I talked to a lot of drunks. I work with a lot of drunks. I've talked to 4 people in the last week and a half that are all struggling in various ways. Some are struggling to stay sober. Some are struggling with the grass is greener on the other side. One guy hasn't been to a meeting in 12 years, has not drank, and he said, I'm in a lot of pain. I have a great wife. I have great kids. I have a great job, but I'm in a lot of pain. And I'm like, yeah, I hear you 100%. And then we started talking about AA and God, and he hasn't, like I said, he hasn't been to meetings in 12 years and he's pretty resistant to go, and he doesn't think that's where his solution lies. He's a churchy guy, and which is great, but the church doesn't do necessarily what we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous in terms of going through some sort of step process to clear what's blocking us from God. He did go to 2 online meetings at the same time. And he was trying to go listen to them. And he talked about it. It's pretty funny. I'll tell you about it later.
Celebrate that serenity.
Yes, exactly. There's a couple of guys that I go to meetings with that one guy's been coming around for 20 years, and I don't think he's had any more than probably 6 months sober. He constantly lies. We go to dinner once a week in a big group, and on the way to the meeting, he stops and buys alcohol. He lies to everybody about his drinking until he gets caught. There's another guy who's been coming around about 15 years. He supposedly was supposed to get out of detox yesterday. He had his sponsor in the hospital room and his wife in the hospital room, and was telling both of them at the same time 2 different lies. I think sometimes alcoholics make AA and the 12 steps and our relationship with God very, very, very complicated. It's very, very simple, and we forget that. And it's really tough to see these guys struggle for so long, and I've had private conversations with them, group conversations with them. They say they get it, but they don't. There's another guy who had been coming around for a number of years and drank himself to death. I think about 8 weeks ago. His memorial service is tomorrow. They found him 1 to 2 days after he had died. And what we think is a bottom and what they think is bottom are 2 different things, right? Because this individual had tried to detox himself. This was probably a year ago, tried to detox himself, had a seizure at work, bit off his tongue, and didn't think that that was bad enough to get sober. Unfortunately, we see these things from time to time. So I could probably go on forever, but I won't, because Thomas is falling asleep. So with that, I am done. Thank you all for listening.